千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Chapter 81 has the chapter title, Do Not Accumulate, which is a literal translation of the three characters that you see there in this particular slide. This particular title comes from the middle of the chapter, the second section, which talks about sages not accumulating clutter. This is followed by the final important characteristic that Lao Tzu talks about in regards to the Tao itself, the sages, and us. That important characteristic is non-contention. We previously talked about the difference between peace, pacifism, and the concept of non-contention. So with everything that we have talked about so far, we have a depiction of sages who tend to be minimalist. That is, they don't accumulate a lot of junk. They are unattached to material things, and they are peaceful individuals. They have no need to pick a fight with anyone. So here is what chapter 81 looks like. It is 13 lines, relatively short, and the 13 lines can be divided into 3 sections. After the sectional analysis, this is what it looks like. The 3 sections start with the first section, which is the longest, with 6 lines, from line 1 to line 6. As you can see in this slide, this section can be further subdivided into 3 subsections with 2 lines each. Each of the 3 depicts an aspect of living one's life, and it has to do with our communication with one another. So one can say that the first section, section 1, is a practical guide for life. It tells us what to do and what not to do when interacting with our fellow human beings. The second section has 3 lines, lines 7, 8, and 9. The second section describes the sage not accumulating things, which, as I mentioned, gives this particular chapter its title. And what this section says is that the sages help other people and share their excess with those who don't have enough. They help and they share. The last section of this chapter, section 3, has 4 lines. And as you can see in this slide, it is further subdivided into 2 subsections with 2 lines each. 10 and 11 being one of them. It's about the Tao of heaven. And then the last 2 lines, 12 and 13, about the Tao of sages. The Tao of sages derives from the Tao of heaven. It's an emulation of the heavenly Tao. This is what we ended last time. So we'll briefly recap and review the concepts we looked at before, and then finalize everything by connecting non-contention to the other chapters of the Tao Te Ching to have that overall complete understanding. But first, the recap. So as I mentioned, the first section that you can see here in this slide is about the three different aspects: what to do, what not to do. Here is how we can summarize it in one slide. In this recap slide, summarizing the first section, the 3 points about what to do is what aligns with the Tao. What to avoid is what's contrary to the Tao. The first is the point about beautiful words, words that sound great, but aren't true. They are contrary to the Tao because the Tao is focused on the truth. So we should do the opposite of saying beautiful words. Now, that doesn't mean we go around pointing out unpleasant, unbeautiful truths to everyone. That's not what it says. Tao cultivators usually remain quiet when there is no need to speak, no need to fill the silence with useless words. Tao cultivators prefer to observe and learn instead. When there is no need to speak, they are just quiet and content to just observe everything and everyone. There is always a lot to learn through careful observation of the Tao. But if Tao cultivators were asked, they have no problems at all speaking the truth without any attempt to make their words beautiful or pleasant to the ears. The truth may be appealing to the listener, in which case they're automatically beautiful. They may be unappealing to the listener despite being true, and that will make them not so beautiful. Either way, it's the truth. The second point is about debates. As I mentioned before, many translators avoid translating what Lao Tzu actually said. Lao Tzu said debate. Translators usually dance around it. Sometimes they'll talk about arguments, not debates. Sometimes they'll talk about justifying themselves, giving excuses. These translators go through a lot of effort to express this line, this expression, in anything but the word debate. And it's possibly because they feel debates can be a good thing. That's rather common in the Western world. What Lao Tzu is noting, to the contrary, is that in debates, there sure is a lot of beautiful words thrown back and forth. That is, stuff that all sounds good and reasonable, but aren't necessarily true. This is because the goal of a debate is to convince, to persuade, and therefore people will shade what they say, lean toward a certain direction, gloss over certain things, making the words more beautiful and less true in the process. So Tao cultivators are happy to explain their views and answer clarifying questions. But as soon as the discussion turns into a debate, so for example, the other party may come up with a question like, well, just for clarification, isn't it true that what you just said is based on incomplete evidence? That's actually masquerading clarification as a way to draw you into a debate. So as soon as Tao cultivators detect the beginning of a debate, they decline to get involved. They may say, the victory of this debate is yours. You win. You've won the debate. Thank you. Now, it is plain that Tao cultivators have carefully thought through their position, their views, so debating tactics are not likely to change how they feel. It may give them more of a nuance, but for the most part, it doesn't necessarily change their, their mind on a particular issue. But then, if you think about actual debates, it's rare indeed that a debate, no matter who wins, changes minds. We definitely see this all the time. Once every 4 years in a presidential debate, both sides claim victory, both sides say the other guys had lost the debate. And yet, no one's minds got changed. Very few people's minds got changed. Finally, the last point is the warning about jack of all trades, master of none. For you see, those who speak beautiful but untrue words often present themselves as broadly knowledgeable. They have the gift of gab, they're glib, they can talk. And that too is deceptive. The Tao is focused on focus. That is, the Tao is about delving deeply into a worthy subject in order to learn what is worthwhile expenditure of time. Now, when we look at this and apply these ideas to life in general, we see many examples represented by this slide. Even in a meeting like this, talking about the Tao, think about how many people become like spiritual tourists, trying one wisdom tradition after another, while not necessarily getting anywhere. On the other hand, Tao cultivators get on the path and stay on the path. The next recap is about the next section, about the sage not accumulating, which, as I mentioned, is the chapter title for this particular chapter. We can summarize the second section with this slide and the next slide. And the reason is because these lines, they say, sages do not accumulate. The more they assist others, the more they possess. The more they give to others, the more they gain. That seems pretty plain and easy to understand just by themselves. But if we were to look more deeply into them, we would see that these lines echo previous chapters, each using a specific metaphor to make the point. This is the slide that'll summarize that. On the giving part, there is a way to give in accordance with the Tao. Chapter 77 of the Tao Te Ching says, reduce that which has excess, add to that which is lacking. So in this final chapter of the Tao Te Ching, chapter 81, it echoes chapter 79. Chapter 79 uses a loan agreement as a metaphor. That is, the sages are always lending out spiritual currency. They are the lender, so to speak, but they never want or need any payback on their spiritual loans. So this is a way to talk about giving without expectations. They reduce their excess to give to those who don't have enough. On the right-hand side, with the helping, this is also an echo. This concept echoes Tao Te Ching chapter 77, which uses shooting arrows, bow and arrow, as a metaphor. The sages are always looking for ways to share what they have too much of, they should give to those who have too little. This applies not just to physical objects, but also to intangibles like mutual understanding, personal connection, and emotional support. So these are the metaphors that go into the concepts. They echo previous chapters. Finally, with this one slide, I want to summarize the very last section and lead us into a discussion on non-contention. The final section that we went through together, all about non-contention, just like you saw with the previous two slides, this is something that echoes previous chapters as well. And those previous chapters talk about the different aspects of non-contention. And let me bring those slides back to go over the previous chapters on non-contention. As we saw previously, chapter 3 talks about non-contention in terms of people squabbling. That is, they are competing with one another to get ahead. We definitely see a lot of that in our society because human nature hasn't changed in 2,500 years. So there's a lot of contention going on. Now, chapter 8 switches to using water as a metaphor for non-contention. The highest goodness resembles water. Why? Because water greatly benefits myriad things without contention. Water benefits all living things, and it contends against none of the living things. So Tao sages learn from that and act in the same way. And then chapter 22, this is the first instance, first of the two, about the sages being peaceful in nature, not contending with the world, and therefore the world cannot contend with them. We see this again in chapter 66. It talks about the exact same thing. The sages do not contend, so the world cannot contend with them. It's talking about the same thing in the exact same way. That just underlines the importance of non-contention. And then chapter 68, now, in this context of chapter 68, Lao Tzu is extending non-contention to everyone. It's not just the sages, not just the Tao, not just nature, anyone who interacts with other human beings. So that includes all of us. And what Lao Tzu says is that it is particularly important to be non-contentious when it comes to managing people. Lao Tzu here is advocating guidance, mentoring in management as being much more effective than clashing, confrontation, coercing, forcing people to do what they don't want to do. Instead, it's better to motivate them. It's better to inspire them so that they put out even more effort than they knew that they were capable of. Clashing and confrontation are oftentimes sourced in ego. And those of us who have had bosses or managers like that, we probably all seen that. Clashing and confrontation based on ego gratification. Then lastly, chapter 73 goes back to the Tao of Heaven. Nature does not contend against anyone. Nature being represented by the Tao of Heaven, no contention, but the Tao of Heaven always excels in winning, always wins in the end. So out of all this material in previous chapters about non-contention, we're looking at non-contention from the entirety of the Tao Te Ching. We can distill all of them into 4 main points about non-contention. The first of the 4 main points is about non-contentious nature, as we have seen in Tao Te Ching 8, which is using water as a metaphor. What this points out is that, well, you see, water does not try to be non-contentious, it simply is. So this is Lao Tzu linking the nature of water to the nature of the Tao cultivator, because deep down, we all just want to live in peace. Perhaps when we were younger, some of us might be pretty driven by the fires of youth. Some of us might be combative, looking for trouble, spoiling for a fight. But without a doubt, the older you get, the more your true nature is apparent. Pretty soon, angry words like, how dare they? I'll show them. It will evolve into the more mature, just let it go. Just let it be. In the Tao, non-contention is the essence. It is the nature of the Tao cultivator. That is, we're not talking about non-contention as a strategy, like pretending to be non-contentious in order to wait for the right time to strike. It's not that, not something we try to do, but it's the way we are because we become the peaceful kind of people, those who bring peace, the peacemakers, when we study, apply, and understand the Tao. As far as using it as a strategy, pretending to be non-contentious, well, water doesn't do that. Water would simply assume the low profile. When Lao Tzu says water assumes a low profile, he's pointing at a pool of water, which in any vicinity naturally flows to the lowest point. Water has no need to battle against anything or anyone, and it's the same for us. So that's main point number one. Non-contentious nature applies to the Tao and applies to us. It's what we really want. Main point number two, the second point, is about letting go of attachments. And this is expressed in Tao Te Ching 22 and 66. Because they do not contend, so the world cannot contend with them, speaking about the sages. Now, contending with the world, we find, is oftentimes associated with attachments. When you are attached to something, that gives rise to competition and contention. In the Tao, it's different. It's about bettering ourselves, not comparing against others. So we can extend from these simple words to a lot of different aspects in life. What are some things that we get attached to? For instance, we can get easily attached to the score. When I talk about the score, it's something that manifests in different ways. In sports, it's the points scored in the game. Yeah, that's the score. Everybody knows that. In life, it's the various markers of success that society has set out for us. Position, income, illusory gains and losses. That's the other meaning of the score. So if we stick with sports for now, because that's an easy metaphor, we may be fixated on specific scores in a particular game, like which team scored more points? That's always the question. Was it a close game? The scores were very close. Was it a blowout? Was it one-sided? Was it a landslide? We want to know the score. In the Tao, it's not about the score. If we were to apply the Tao to sport, it isn't the score that you end up with that's important. The important thing is about perfecting movements, the techniques. It's about the perfection of the wordless communication between team members working in harmony. Here's what I mean by that. Those of us who have participated in sports, we know exactly what this is talking about. Every now and then, when you play sports, you've felt it, you've lived it. Now, perhaps at the time, you weren't necessarily able to point to it and call it out. You might say, I was in the flow, I was in the zone, everything was perfect. It's about the perfect game that you had once upon a time. In that perfect game, everything came together beautifully. For whatever reason, you were in the groove, you were in tune. As I said, you were in the zone, you were in the flow state. If it's something like basketball, you remember the times when you took a shot and your physical movement was just right. Your timing was perfect. The ball flies in this beautiful arc. You don't even have to look at the ball. You know it's going right in. You can turn around and walk in the other direction to the other side of the court. It is as if you've got eyes in the back of your head. You know you have just scored even before the ball hits the net. Many people have had this experience. It's not something foreign to human beings. Or on the team communication front, likely you have experienced one particular day, one particular game, one particular moment, you and your teammates are moving down the field. Doesn't have to be basketball, could be something else. Somehow, everybody in the team is perfectly in sync. You can feel it. You know what they're thinking, they know what you're going to do. You pass the ball without looking, they catch the ball easily without breaking rhythm. Soon, your team finds an open player and he scores easily. The whole thing was like a beautiful choreography. So that is the harmonious side of the Tao. There's no contention there, only harmony, because in that moment, everybody was able to let go of an attachment to the score to end up with, but just focusing on the moment, living in the here and now. That's when the magic happens. The opposite is to fight, strive, struggle for every point. That is contention, and contention due to attachment. Everything is a struggle. Everybody is striving, straining. So that metaphor applies to life. Wouldn't want to play a game like that from beginning to end. It's exhausting. And apply it to life. Wouldn't want to live like that. Wouldn't want to live life with that amount of striving, straining, struggling. It's exhausting. Next, the third point is about being non-contentious in life. So the previous point leads naturally into this. We don't want to live life in the contentious way. And this we see in 68. And this is about the power of managing people. So the key realization here is that the Tao follows its own laws. The Tao will not adapt itself to us. Therefore, the best strategy is for us to align with the Tao. This applies not just to the sages, but for everyone. It's not just for the Tao or nature, it's for you and me. Anyone who wants to lead a better life should learn about this. When we move along with nature, we find it going smooth and easy. Wouldn't it be great if we can always live life in that way? Now, of course, people may say, Well, listen, I have a boss, but I'm not a manager or supervisor, so this doesn't really apply to me. Well, actually, we all manage people from time to time, even if it's just in terms of our family, like being parents, or in terms of the social circle, being a friend. Sometimes we may need to get kids to behave. Sometimes we may need to talk friends into doing an activity, even something as little as suggesting a place for lunch. In all cases, those who manage or interact with people skillfully, they are the ones who lower themselves. That is, they remain open and approachable, and that is non-contention manifesting in life, in everyday life. Every interaction is non-contentious. The last point, the fourth and final point, is about embracing nature, as pointed out in chapter 73. The Tao heaven does not contend and yet excels in winning. This is at odds with the Western concept about the conquest of nature. The key realization here is that we are part of nature. So working against nature, trying to subdue nature, is working against ourselves. So when we talk about everything, that includes nature, it includes us, it includes other human beings. So this is natural. This is a concept that was easily accepted from the perception and mindset of an agricultural society. And that's because an agricultural society works with, not against, the changing of seasons. They have the opposite of the conquest of nature mindset. The conquest orientation is emphasizing human objectives, whereas the Tao is emphasizing harmony with everything and everyone. It is inclusive because we're at our best when we succeed together. Its opposite, the conquest of nature, divides us because the default assumption is the zero-sum game. If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. Whereas in the Tao, it's like we can easily achieve victory together. In fact, we can do it more easily as a group than we can individually, much more easily. That's what I mean by succeeding together. So we've seen now the 4 points. Let me bring them together in one slide as a mini summary for non-contention. So first, non-contention is the essence of the Tao. That means it's the essence of nature. It's the essence of you and me. The Tao does not contend against anything or anyone. Nature, represented by water, is non-contentious. It is our essence because we're part of the Tao. 2, non-contention means letting go. This is the part about attachments. Contention is sourced in attachments. Overcoming yourself instead of others is the Tao, rather than to get attached or obsessed with, say, amount of money, where you're going to end up. Rather than that, the focus is on the process of bettering yourself. So not comparing yourself with other people. I would humbly use myself as an example. Think about what I do as an author. Think about this, the Tao meeting that you are a part of. You probably are already aware there's no one else out there who's doing something similar. And that doesn't really matter. I could care less about comparison with other people. I like to focus on bettering myself, bettering this presentation for you. It's the same idea. Number 3, live the non-contentious life. This is applying the above to the life we have yet to live. I want to reduce contention in my life. I want to bring the peace. Tao sages and cultivators emulate nature in practicing non-contention. When we follow the same path, life becomes smoother and easier. So if someone is agitated, I'll try to bring the peace. I'll try to bring down the temperature, because everyone is better off when there's more harmony, not less. Number 4, non-contention embraces nature and harmony. So this is the opposite of the conquest of nature mentality. The idea, partnership and stewardship with nature, not conquest. We bring out the best from people by working with human nature. Sometimes we forget. We think about nature, we look at the great outdoors. Human nature is part of nature because we are embedded in nature. Fighting nature, as I mentioned, would be fighting ourselves. Exploiting nature would be us trying to exploit ourselves. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Ultimately, ends up being failure and futility. Staying thin with human nature, we're all part of it, and this is why kindness is rewarded by the Tao. It's just the way this universe operates. Now, I hope whenever you hear the way, when I say the way, that you will mentally map that to the Tao, mentally translate the way to the Tao. So when I say it is just the way this universe operates, hopefully in your mind, you will translate that to this is simply the Tao of the universe. So having summarized non-contention, I would like to move now to a slide that I feel can graphically bring together the many things that we have talked about for chapter 81. Here we are at the final presentation slide of chapter 81, right before we go into paraphrase and full circle. So this is meant to graphically summarize everything Lao Tzu has spoken of in this particular chapter. This is about different aspects, 3 different aspects about how we live, starting with the mind. 知者, the one who knows. Those who know. That's what the 2 Chinese characters are. And my label there, real knowledge, because Lao Tzu says those who know or those who possess real knowledge are not broad knowledge. They do not appear to know everything. They don't present themselves as a know-it-all. In our lives, we have seen know-it-alls just really betray their arrogance. So this right here is reflecting in your mind, your thoughts. In the Tao, this also means being consistent in your internal thoughts and external actions. As being consistent, as in being consistent whether you are in public or all by yourself. So this is the mental aspects, pointing to the mind. Then, in the first section, we also saw this emphasis on communication. We talked about beautiful words and debates. So this is associated with not just your mind now, but your words, the words that you utter, the things you say. Here we've got 2 parts. To the left, declining to debate with other people, 不辩. Concede victory if that is what the other party is looking for. They just want to win. That's fine. They can win. Then 信言, words that people can believe in or the truth. So both 信言 and 不变 are based on adherence to reality in your communication. The idea is that the world is full of deception. So by doing our best to be truthful, when called upon to express the truth, we can contribute to making the world a little bit better. So having covered the words, let's also talk about actions, because this chapter talks about mentality, the mind, words, spoken communication, and action. So that's the reason I am using the 1,000 hands of the Bodhisattva to represent these acts of giving and helping out of compassion. In this chapter specifically, it is the compassion with which you extend your assistance to those who need your help without asking for anything in return, without setting conditions. So no conditions, no expectations. It's the 1,000 hands of assistance because it's the assistance rendered for all. It's not selective. It doesn't pass judgment on who deserves or does not deserve to be helped. And then to the right, the 1,000 hands of giving. It's the same thing. The assistance to those by giving to them who do not have enough. The 1,000 hands of giving. Now, in accordance with the Tao, it means that you give in accordance with your abilities, that is, giving your excess. When you do that, you can continue giving for a very long time because what you give is not something that will hurt your ability to continue giving. So that's the action part, to go with the words and the mind. And finally, the Tao, right in the middle, right in the center. Everything is based on the heavenly Tao. The ideal of Lao Tzu. I can sum up everything with 2 lines. Line 1, benefit everyone, harm no one. Line 2, assistance to all, contention with none. So benefit everyone, harm no one, and then assistance to all, contention with none. At the end of the Tao Te Ching, at the end of chapter 81, this is the most important point that Lao Tzu wanted to make. So now, I think we are ready to do the paraphrase. The paraphrase is a way to demonstrate what we understand by using modern language to rephrase the original meaning. So as I mentioned, we have 3 sections in this particular chapter. And we begin with the first section, and you can see the slide. It depicts that the first section is all about communication, ending with knowledge. So we have beautiful words, we have debates, we have being brought of knowledge. So the underlying message here is about communication and possible deception. Here is the paraphrase I would like to offer. Blunt truths about the world may not be pleasing to hear. People prefer beautiful, soothing words, even if they distort reality. Unscrupulous people will take advantage of this and use such words in debates to be victorious. Knowing this, the good and wise avoid getting into debates in the first place, particularly the kind where participants put on scholarly airs and pretend to know more than they actually do. And I will bet that you have seen debates exactly like that. Section 2, here we talk about the accumulation, as in what to avoid, the assistance, the giving. So here's the paraphrase for that. In addition to debates, Tao sages also avoid the accumulation of clutter. Their focus is not on personal gain, but on helping and giving to others. The more they do this, the more they enrich themselves spiritually. And I would further suggest that the same is true for all of us. There's a Tao sage in every single one of us. We can all do the same thing. And lastly, the last section is about the Tao of heaven and then the Tao of the sages. So here's the paraphrase for that. The sages recognize the heavenly Tao as a positive force of nature. Human beings who know how to work with it will benefit from it while avoiding harm. The Tao of the sages, following the same pattern, provides beneficial assistance to everyone it touches in the spirits of harmony and non-contention. So just like what Lao Tzu has written, Lao Tzu ends on the note of non-contention. In the paraphrase, we should as well. So there is the paraphrase to 81. Some people have told me in their feedback that they find the paraphrase to be much more easily comprehensible because, after all, it's in the modern vernacular, much more easily understood than the ancient lines. If so, that's good. It's good as long as we stick to the original meaning and we call it a paraphrase and not a translation. So, in the last lines of Tao Te Ching, chapter 81, Lao Tzu talks about the sages helping people without getting into contention with any of them. So the key here is helping them rather than conflict. We link this back to the beginning. We see Lao Tzu talking about truthful words versus beautiful words. We can link them together to form a coherent message. And that message is clear. One of the ways that sages can help people is to give them the truths that they need to hear. Here is the home truth. Maybe you won't want to hear it, but you need to hear it. Wanting to hear something and needing to hear something, quite different sometimes. When we follow the example of the sages, we also become trusted advisors like the sages themselves. That is, your friends can depend on you to tell them the truth. Maybe they're not getting the truth from anyone else, but they can depend on you to let them know what is really going on. Therefore, the most valuable two lines from this chapter happen to be the last two lines. The Tao of sages assists and does not contend. And now I think you can see why we spent all of that time on non-contention. It is the final message, final lesson, final concept from Lao Tzu, and that's why it is important. This brings our discussion of chapter 81 to a close, which also brings our round of Tao Te Ching discussions from chapter 1 to 81 to a close. So just to review, we don't forget what we have talked about previously. In part 1 of our discussion about 81, we talked about communication. To speak truthfully, we can be gentle, we can use the soft approach, but we should stick to the truth and then refrain from getting into debates. This is something that has completely transformed me. As a young man, I was into debates. When I learned about this, initially I disagreed with it, but then I came to see its wisdom. Today, I will never participate in any debates. And this part of the Tao teachings has changed me irrevocably. Number 3, narrow your focus on the most important things in life. This is derived from when Lao Tzu says the sages do not accumulate. And this is because the sages have a focus on simplicity. They simplify and streamline their lives. The reason why they do that is because spiritual power corresponds with simplicity. The simpler you can make things without losing their essence, the more spiritually powerful you become. So, in living the Tao life, an important practice is to reduce the many to the few, and finally, at a higher level, reduce the few to the one. And this is why the bottommost line here that you see is my suggestion to you to identify the thing that is the most meaningful to you in life. So this is the summary that I offered previously for part 1 of chapter 81. Here's part 2. We went through this before as well. We didn't get around to talking about the very last one, but Lao Tzu is advising us to, number 1, let go of the need to accumulate and follow the example of the sages. The more assistance you provide to people, the more friendship you possess. The more you share your excess, the more things you give away, the more joy you receive. And the other advice from Lao Tzu is to follow the heavenly Tao. So remember, the heavenly Tao benefits all, harms none. Taking that cue, we ourselves should work to benefit everyone while harming no one. Lastly, follow the Tao of the sages. So this means act mindfully to all. By that, I mean provide assistance, contend against none. That's the ultimate message. Just reiterate it in this summary, hopefully to everyone's benefit. Now, our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.